Now, you've always focused on the role of narrative in politics. I mean, I think many of us do as writers, but that's really been a specialty of yours. And I am interested in your thoughts on what Mamdani might have done, not just rhetorically, but in terms of story, narrative, that was different from what other left candidates have done. And if there's anything in there that might have been a lesson for the rest of the American left. What do you think?
So yeah, I think this is I mean, you could write a whole book about Zohran Mamdani's campaign strategy around messaging because it was so well done. It was so perfectly crafted. It was pitch perfect in the entire time that from the time his campaign began a year ago, which I really credit the starting point of his campaign as the moment that he sat down for hunger strike with taxi workers, to his win last Tuesday, he did not falter once. There may have been like one moment where he like apologized to the NYPD on someone's talk show that might have gotten abolitionist progressives a little bit like worried. There was his way of maybe responding to the accusations of calling for a global intifada, but I thought he explained himself pretty well. But those are like really tiny nitpicky things. Other than any of those, which were, only the smallest blemishes, he ran a pitch perfect, multi-dimensional campaign. And I want to break that down for your audience a little bit because I think it's really important, not in as much as we need to like step back and continue sort of hero worship of Mamdani, but in as much as it can illustrate a way forward for other candidates seeking office who are coming from the left, who want to take power, who want to change our country for the better, right? The whole point of a left strategy to build power needs to involve taking elected office alongside outside pressure. And so what Mamdani did that was so, so effective was that he leaned into his identity instead of shying away from it. This is something Democrats have been accused of doing too much of. And instead of listening to all of the naysayers, he went full force. Someone pointed out on social media, and I thought this was so clever, all of the things that the right wrongly accused or claimed Barack Obama was, Zohran Mamdani was in actuality. He was
Right.
Africa and he is a Muslim, right? And instead of trying to downplay that, he leaned into it, down to the font and the colors of his campaign literature, which are basically based on Bollywood movie signs. If you travel anywhere in India, you see these colorful, most of them harken from the 80s and 90s, colorful billboards hand painted by artists that have these sensationalist, like pop art style fonts. His campaign picked that to lean into his identity. But then he reached out across identity. For the campaign ads that he recorded in other languages were genius: Spanish, Hindi/Urdu, Arabic. I mean, it was quite remarkable. That all of that aside, there's so much more. I mean, just give me a few more minutes. In the last week of his campaign, he went club hopping, right? He showed his millennial card. He went club hopping. He went from one club to the other. He knew the words of the songs that young voters were dancing to. He was up with the DJs, dancing with them. And then on the very last victory speech that he finally gave, he started out quoting Eugene Debs, right? The most
Right. I caught that. Absolutely.
socialist. He quoted Eugene Debs. Then he sent a message to Donald Trump saying, I have 4 words for you because I know you're listening. Turn the volume up. This was a direct quote of rapper KRS-One's signature song, Turn the Volume Up, that essentially has something to the effect of, the lyrics are something to the effect of like, we're gonna, get rid of the monsters, or I can't remember the exact line now, but you can look it up, Turn the Volume Up. And then he wrapped up his speech to the soundtrack from a film. This might have been missed by non-South Asians, but there is a very famous movie that is called Dhoom, and that millennial Indians know really well. And the signature song of that movie is Dhoom Machale, which was the name, which was the beats that if you watch the very end of his victory speech, there was a song that played out, and it roughly translates into "make some noise." And the film is about the rich stealing from the poor stealing from the rich, like a Robin.
Okay. So a
Yeah.
Robin Hood type theme. Yeah.
So that's all the identity stuff, which immediately allowed people to connect with him. He was so authentic. And then he had a very strong messaging discipline on bread and butter economic justice issues. He didn't speak just in vague platitudes like Obama did, because a lot of people are comparing him to Obama. They're thinking the last time I felt this way was when Obama was elected or came out on the scene. He didn't just focus on vague platitudes about hope and change. He was really, really concrete and specific. Universal childcare, this is how we're going to pay for it. Fast and free buses, this is how we're going to pay for it. Grocery stores, municipal run grocery stores, this is what, down to what it will and won't sell. So specific that it, and pitch perfect to people's needs, and then never went off message, hammered it over and over again to the point where people looking at him immediately knew that this is what they were going to get when he got elected. So this was such an important strategy to send it to the country. I am a brown man. I represent everything you think you hate, and I'm going to deliver all the things that we all need. I am not leaving. Get used to me. I'm here. Don't scapegoat immigrants. We are part of this community, and we together are going to work for all of us, to benefit all of us, for all of the things that we actually need. And by like European social democracy standards, his asks are not even that radical. It was a brilliant, brilliant campaign. And other left candidates need to study how they can do something similar.
Yeah, and I would say in terms of narrative, Sonali, thank you for that, because that's really helpful. There are, two things I would add, not add as in they're missing, but add as in they complement what you said, I think. One would be the word unapologetic, or a word along those lines, that certainly Democrats, especially progressive Democrats as a group, have tended to feel sort of apologetic and tentative about, we're sorry, but we'd really like to give you health care, kind of. But whether it came to his own identity as a Muslim, as a brown man, as a millennial, as a young person, or I guess I don't know what he is generation-wise, as a young person, or his policies, the vibe throughout was, I am what I am, here it is. But it's fun. He also, I remember when I was
always joyful.
I remember when I was a rock and roll musician, a manager said to me, the successful groups are the ones that create a world you want to live in. And whether it was the Beatles, whether it was Bowie, whether it was, whomever, it's like, yeah, I'd like to be, it's still true today of, whomever, Lady Gaga, Taylor Swift, about their dedicated fans. And he had that energy of, no, but this world that I'm describing is a world you're gonna love, Yeah. And so that's one. And the other thing that I've talked about in a couple other places, including as a guest rather than a host, I wrote before the election about the fact that, as I put it, I'm blurring here a little bit for some reason, excuse me, I'll try to retain my focus. Sorry, I shouldn't get compulsive about that, but give me just a second and we'll see if we can fix that. It's Trump. He's coming after me, right? The other thing is that I did a piece right before Mamdani's election called something like Zohran's program is surprisingly affordable, with a subhead, I wish all revolutions came this cheap. And what I meant by that was, first of all, I ran the numbers, aside from universal childcare, which costs a lot, but could easily be raised with modest shifts. Everything else is a rounding error in the New York City budget. First of all, free buses, $600 million in lost revenue, which is about less than 1% of the New York City budget. 1/10 of that for the grocery store experiment, which would become self-sustaining if it works. Nothing for the rent freeze. Plus, it would free up more money into the New York City economy and would boost everything. And also that most of what he's proposed has been tried somewhere else. You came on the show and wrote and reported about New Mexico's free universal child care program. Michael Bloomberg proposed a limited free bus program. We have a free bus program where I live.
Michelle Wu in Boston is already piloting one. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. And what was different is not the individual pieces. The Democratic Party usually presents you with a laundry list. What was different was the overarching narrative of in his words, democratic socialism.
Yes,
not that, we'll try to get this for you, but you deserve this. You work hard. You deserve this. And I thought that was a narrative act as well.
Yes, I think that was so critical. Also, he himself lives in a rent-controlled apartment in the city. So yes, his mother's a famous filmmaker and his father's an academic, but his own assets and values, I mean, it's been looked at. He's basically a New Yorker. He is a very average New Yorker, right? Doesn't fall in the very low end of working class New Yorkers, nor on the very high end. And he was able to really capture the spirit and the energy. And you're right. I think that's so important to say. This is what New Yorkers deserve, because every politician comes along thinking, well, what can we do not to alienate the rich residents in our city? And no one thinks about all of the displacement of ordinary people who are barely making it out of the city because somehow they're never seen as valuable enough. And so, yeah, he really uplifted and valued ordinary New Yorkers. And I think that combination of joyful, because, it's easy for the left to be a little strident when it comes to when we talk about our issues. And for a lot of folks, it's easy to show that anger. And Mamdani genuinely looked like he was joyful, having a good time. Someone called him when he was demonstrating a city rental bicycle. Some right-winger yelled at him, communist, across the street.
Right.
And he turned back and said, I think it's pronounced cyclist. And
right.
Just so joyful, able to pivot without being hateful. And that plus uncompromising on his position. So literally his victory speech, often victory speeches are a little especially the centrist Democrats, victory speeches are more appeasing. We're all going to work together. Of course, I'm going to reach across the aisle. He was like, this is how we're going to enact the agenda. And the second day, the day after he was elected, he unveiled his 5-women transition team, the most central figure of whom is Lena Khan.
I saw that. Yeah.
The chair of the Federal Trade Commission, who under Biden, she was one of the few things that Biden did really well was appoint her. And she had gone after corporate monopolies and enforcing antitrust laws. So with his team, he made it very clear that he was ready, willing, and able to enact the ambitious agenda that he promised. So for me, there was the pre-election model of how you run a perfect, incredible, pitch perfect campaign. And now the post-election, even though just a week has passed, there are some extremely promising signs of what the left can do to ensure that they are not breaking promises. Because the worst thing that can happen is for Zohran Mamdani to be the poster child for left disappointment, right? Or for the general public's disappointment in a leftist agenda.
And he's going to, just let me interrupt you if I may for a second, Sonali. First of all, he's going to be subjected to, well, he's already been under enormous pressure. The fact that he's been able to handle it so well is impressive to me. But the pressure he's going to have in governing New York and the crises he's going to face, what the left, we on the left sometimes fail to recognize is that if we're not there as a countervailing force, then we're setting ourselves up for disappointment, no matter who it is. First of all, anybody, including Zohran Mamdani, is only human. They're going to have their weak spot. Number two is that they're going to be under tremendous pressure to, so he says he'll keep on, the billionaire heiress, Jessica Tisch as New York City Police Commissioner. I'm okay with a certain level of compromise, but it says to me that we can't do the kind of elect a hero and then sit back and wait for them to show the world how great we are kind of tactic.
Exactly. I agree because it's very, very easy to fall in love with a person and to put your hopes and dreams in that person. People have done it with Obama. They did it with Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris even before they were elected by, you and I have talked about this before, that idea of I'm with her, which is just such a wrong dynamic because a public servant works for the people. And I think Mamdani's already made it very clear that that is his goal as well, that he wants to, he's leaned into his identity, but not in the way in which he wants people to put him on a pedestal, right? So what's really, really promising is that there's already outside organizing taking place, because he was able to mobilize 100,000 volunteers for his campaign that were going door to door canvassing for him. And now, what do those 100,000 people do? Because the biggest worry and the biggest flaw we've seen in elections is that people get excited for elections and then go to sleep or whatever, resume their life thinking, all right, I'll just vote for something the next time the election comes around, and they don't pay attention. So there's already a new formation called Our Time for an Affordable NYC. And I encourage audiences to go and check it out. It's Our Time, OURTIME.NYC. And it uses the very signature colors and sort of fonts of the Zohran Mamdani campaign to indicate that the idea is that these are people who are involved in his campaign. They are calling themselves an independent organization who is going to build on this community of volunteers from the Mamdani campaign, saying that this is going to be a vehicle for continued engagement, a way for folks to plug in and stay active while they find a long-term political home. And it's basically an offshoot of his campaign that is attempting to ensure that his agenda is actually enacted. So it's not an official part of the campaign. And they're saying they're fully independent. They're not directed by any elected official. This is really powerful and really important. Another model for us to adopt. So anytime there's an inspiring leftist candidate that's enacting the people's agenda, because that's basically what he was doing, enacting the people's agenda, there needs to be a follow-up after they're elected, because that's just step one of the victory. Step two is ensuring that they actually deliver, because so many times we've seen that step two not happen. I mean, here in LA, we have Mayor Karen Bass. People got excited. She's in place now, but there isn't enough organizing to hold her accountable as there was to help get her elected. So this was really important, I think.
And we saw, I mean, to me, the great example I always go back to is the 19th century populist movement in the United States, which did a couple of things. One, it created lasting organizations where people could do things in their communities and become part of a community, a communal enterprise that gave their lives meaning. And number two, it became, in modern terms, what we'd call a space where people could model the values that they wanted to bring to the society as a whole. For example, populist Granges and other organizations were among the first in this country to have women executives, women leaders, to integrate, and so on. You had the United Mine Workers too, and the union movement being one of the first integrated movements in this country. So if these, if not only in New York City, but elsewhere, we can start to build maybe on the model of something like Our Time, New York City, something that gives people an ongoing purpose, so much the better, because that's how a political campaign becomes a social movement.
I agree. And I think that this is a thing that needs to happen in cities around the country, especially cities are hotbeds of such organizing, in large part because they are so vibrant, diverse centers of culture that everybody loves to visit. And then everybody also loves to trash and trash talk. And a large part of what makes cities great is immigrant cultures. And I'm looking at Seattle, I'm looking at Boston, right? I mentioned Boston, Michelle Wu, She ran unopposed. She has, she's divested from climate, divested city funds from the climate, from fossil fuel companies. And then in Seattle, a Democratic Socialist named Katie Wilson has run for office. They're still counting votes. And it's possible that Seattle may have a socialist mayor too. So we'll see. I'm not sure where the position is right now. All of these cities need that accountability after the fact. And I think we've seen this evolution because cities have had so-called liberal mayors in the past. Like I'm thinking about London Breed in Oakland. I'm thinking about, even for that matter, de Blasio in New
De
York,
Blasio,
right?
I was going to say, yeah.
Who have gotten the first part of the equation right and then gotten the second part of it wrong. And I'm also thinking about the Tea Party movement in the right. There was a moment on the right where an extremist, of course, billionaire funded AstroTurf movement realized that they could play on people's anxieties, have message discipline, be very extremist and radical, and rally enough voters to shift their party so far to the right that now the entire party has gone there. And I think, I don't want to be too much of a, obviously a left agenda is exactly the opposite in terms of not being billionaire funded and actually wanting to govern in people's interest. However, I think people on the left have come to a realization as to how they can win power and the messaging that needs to happen, because what was missing was a cultural component. Democrats had platforms that were very much speaking to progressive values and ideals, but they didn't know how to talk about them. And because they didn't really want to talk about them, because they really were kowtowing to the Wall Streeters. And so the progressives in the party or progressives from outside have come into the party to push it, groups like Justice Democrats or whatever, have really found a cultural moment to make it mainstream to demand affordability. And what is going to get affordability? Not giving more money and tax breaks to the rich, which is the right's solution, but actually fusing money directly from our taxes into our needs. So it's a really powerful moment.
Which forces me, before we go, I'm sorry, to bring up one of my soapboxes, which is that the sort of progressive, what are they, PMC, the professional managerial class Democrats, not only politicians, but many voters, contemptuous of Trump voters. And one of the first things, we've talked about this before, that Mamdani did as a long shot candidate was go to places like Staten Island and Queens, full of Trump voters, and ask them, why'd you vote for the guy? And that willingness to talk, to listen, to hear, I think that's part of why he has this laser focus on affordability, because that's the one thing that brings all Americans together. We can't make ends meet. This is impossible. We're scrambling just to stay in one place. Okay, that's your new coalition. If you can divorce yourself from the billionaires or distance yourself from the billionaires enough to actually do it, the way. Now let's do it.
Exactly. I think that that's really, really important. And, again, some centrist Democrats have thought that the way to that place was to do it through a candidate who was palatable to Trump voters, i.e. a straight white male candidate, think like John Fetterman style people. And of course, when they had the chance, like Bernie Sanders, they chose not to. But after that, they've gone after younger versions.
Right.
Of that, and Mamdani showed that that's irrelevant. And in fact, it's actually better because the Trump goes after immigrants as a way to scapegoat, as a way to distract from billionaires. It actually I think has worked better to have that message come from someone like Mamdani. But I think you're right that because he reached out to Trump voters, the hugest shift that we saw demographically speaking for mayoral races was young male voters. Mamdani, I think there was a 40% increase. I shouldn't say that because I can't remember what it was relative to, whether it was relative to the previous mayor or his own. Anyway, there was a big jump in the number of young male voters, the same demographic that in the 2024 election, people were all worried was tilting right because young men went hard for Trump across race. And in New York City, young men went hard for Mamdani, which is really awesome. So let's see what happens.
We depend on your support here at the 0 Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.